Welcome to Quantum Leap. We're having a really great show today, and it's with great pleasure that I've got David Kolbe from Kolbe.com with me. Kolbe is, I think they're cognitive indicators, which are predictors of performance, and David's going to talk about how you can use the Kolbe indicators to leverage team performance and productivity, and how to really optimize all the people in your business and in your workforce. So I will pass over to David, who's going to be running this session for the next 35-40 minutes. Thanks very much.
Great to be here with you. Thanks so much. And welcome to everybody watching around the world. So probably a bunch of you are thinking, well, what is this conative thing? Because it's not really well known. And frankly, we are a mission-driven business, and our mission is to help people understand this almost hidden part of the mind, because it really does drive the way we take action. And because of that, it drives the way we perform. And when we tap into it, frankly, we're more successful and we don't even have to work as hard. I know most of you on the call are the kind of people who you're still going to work just as hard, but what that means is you're going to be more successful and more productive. You're going to stop beating your head up against the wall. But kind of what is it? Well, first of all, let me share my screen with you so you can follow along with some slides. So there's me. Those numbers will mean a little bit more in a little bit. So Kolbe Corp, we've been around for 46 years, so we're not new to this. And as I said, we are really driven by our mission to help people understand their own and other people's instinctive strengths. Those are the conative strengths that we're talking about. And then use that understanding and those strengths to achieve more with the things that you care about most. So we're going to be talking a lot about teams today, but it can apply to anything. And it does apply to everything, frankly. So again, this conative thing. So as I said, most people have not heard of it. So if you're sitting there thinking, well, I've never heard of this, don't worry, you're not alone. But it isn't something that we invented at Kolbe Corp. And by the way, Kolbe Corp was started by my mom 46 years ago, Kathy Kolbe. And she's the one who really figured out, she didn't discover conation. That literally goes back to Plato. So more than 2,000 years ago, ancient philosophers were talking about it. But what she did was she figured out how to identify people's conative strengths. But what are they? So let's start with what they're not. Frankly, there are three parts of the mind. And again, that concept goes back to Plato, and many thinkers throughout the centuries have continued to talk about three parts of the mind. Well, the other two we're much more familiar with. So the cognitive part of the mind, that's the thinking. IQ, skills, reason, knowledge. You can read that list there that's on the screen. And the cognitive part of the mind is really what most of us have focused on. Certainly when we go to school, it's all about what do you know? What skills do you have? Can you apply them? So, are you an engineer and you know how to be a good engineer and you've learned how to do those calculations? I'm a lawyer by training. So that's, again, a cognitive skill. Did I learn the facts and the process that I need to be a good lawyer? So that's what school is all about. That's what most of the time for really centuries people have focused on, is teaching people those kinds of skills. We've been measuring those skills and this trait, the cognitive performance of people, for about 130 years now, with IQ tests and other similar tests. So we're all familiar with that. The next one is the affective, the feeling part of the mind. So it's our desires, motivations, values, preferences. Think of it as personality tests. So if we talked about on the cognitive side, there being lots of IQ tests, and by the way, all kinds of different cognitive tests, everything from a spelling test when you were a little kid to, again, I mentioned I'm an attorney, so to take the bar exam here in the States, that's another cognitive test. Most affective tests you think of as a personality test. So the Myers-Briggs, or now MBTI, predictive index, DISC, Hogan, MMPI. There are scores of them, probably hundreds of them, some of them really good, valid, reliable instruments. Some of them not so reliable, maybe just fun. You can go on the internet and find out, what kind of dog are you? That's kind of a fun, silly, affective test, essentially. But it's talking about, as you can see up there, it's really your preferences, your values. MBTI. So they talk about being an introvert versus an extrovert. That's one of those things that's in that affective domain. So those we're more familiar with. And by the way, the MBTI or Myers-Briggs really started the measurement of that trait about 70 years ago. So this third thing is the conative. It's not the thinking or feeling, but it's the doing. It is the way we take action. It's a drive. It's an instinct. What we've seen is people are born with it. It doesn't change over time. It sticks with you for your life, so you can really rely on it. You can count on it. It's your talents. It's those innate things. It's not a skill that you learn that somebody teaches you. It's just a talent that you, and a way of doing things that you're born with. So that's kind of the start. I should also say, feel free to chat stuff in for me if you guys are on live and you want to chat in and have a question. I may not see them all the time because I'm presenting stuff also, but I would love to get questions. I will also wait and set aside some time at the end for questions if you have them. Okay, so that's the setup for 3 parts of the mind. But this conative piece, really, what is it? Well, it's measured by the Kolbe A index. So yes, you can go to Kolbe.com and take the Kolbe A index and find out. You don't have to. You can also kind of figure out, you can try to sense the way you take action. And we'll talk about what the Kolbe A index results tell you. But more importantly, what we've seen is the Kolbe A index itself, and more importantly, conative strengths do not seem to be differently distributed by gender, age, or race. So that's where it says unbiased. So if I know you're a man versus a woman, that doesn't help me guess what your conative strengths are going to be, because men and women seem to have the same distribution of conative strengths. It's positive. This is not about what you can't do or what you're bad at. This is about the natural way that you take action. So it's about tapping into that, making it a positive. Look, we will talk about where it might go off track. So I don't want to be unrealistically positive and optimistic. Sure, there are challenges that are presented. We all face times when we're in a job or we're on a team and we just don't seem to click with the other people or in that role. Then we'll talk about what you do, but your strengths are always a positive. So it really is about figuring out what to do with them. And the Kolbe A index is valid and reliable. As I said, it looks like these conative strengths don't change over time. And I say looks like because, look, we're always looking at evidence to see, is there something we missed? Are we wrong? But the evidence that we've seen with the Kolbe index results shows that it's reliable, it's steady over time, and that the Kolbe A index results themselves are valid. We've been at this a long time. Actually, a little side note for those of you who really know cognitive testing, and you've heard of something called the Wonderlic. It used to be the Wonderlic personnel test. Now I think it's maybe just WPI most of the time. That was developed by my grandfather. So I'm actually a 3rd generation psychometric analyst, I guess would be the way to put it. So we've kind of been doing this a long time, and the results themselves are valid. This is what they look like. So there are 4 action modes. So when you get your Kolbe results, and it's less about the results themselves again, than it's just understanding yourself. Each of us have a strength in one of these 4 action modes that make up the conative part of the mind. So I'll go into detail in a second, but just very quickly: fact finder, follow through, quick start, and implementer. Fact finder is about how we gather and share information. Follow through is about how we organize and design. Quick start is about how we deal with risk and uncertainty. And implementer is how we handle space and tangibles. So it's really that 3-dimensional, tactile, physical part. Each one of these 4, and again, I'll describe them in more detail, but each one of these 4 you fall somewhere on a continuum. So as you see on each of those, we call them tubes, in each one of those tubes, you'll get a score from 1 to 10. If you're 1 to 3, we actually call that the react zone. 4, 5, and 6 is the mid-range in each of the modes. The react, the 1 through 3 is counteract. The mid one is react. And then the 7 through 10 is the initiate action zone in each of those. So what is it? Fact finder. Fact finder, as I said, is how we gather and share information. So if you are a 1, 2, or 3 in that counteract fact finder zone, you really get the overview. The word in that tube says simplify. That's a good, if you think about someone in that zone, they don't get bogged down in too many details and specifics. They really simplify. They get the overview. They're the kind of person who reads the executive summary, says, yep, great, that's what I need to know. Now I can move forward. People in that mid-range, they really get the essential facts. So they'll dive in a little bit deeper in terms of investigating, getting information, details. They'll do that more than the people who are 1, 2, or 3, but it's still in that mid-range. So they think of it this way, they explain. They don't just simplify and look for the couple key bullet points. They'll explain with a little more. And then 7 through 10, that initiate action zone, those are people who really need to get specifics and details. They do research, they get information. If you ask this person a question and they don't know the answer, they really will resist guessing at it. They will need to do some research. Now, if you ask them a question and they know the answer because they've already researched it, they can give you an answer immediately, but they need to know the details and specifics. They're the kind of people who become experts in something. They go deep, maybe in 1, maybe in 4 different things, but they need to have all of that detailed information. The next one is follow through. And as I said, this is how we organize and design. It's about systems and structures. So I'll start on the other end of the spectrum here and start with that 7, 8, 9, or 10 in follow through. People in that zone, they design systems. They initiate action by designing systems, by organizing. If you go into a person's office and they're let's say a 9 in follow through, they have places for things. If they have places for things and all the stuff isn't in its place, and you know that person isn't initiating follow through, that's a little bit of a red flag. Wow, they're too busy to maybe tackle that. Something else is going on. But they have stuff organized and they created it. The people in that mid-range, 4, 5, and 6, they may have things organized, but they didn't do it themselves. Maybe they sat down at a desk where it was already organized. There was a filing system. There were places to put things. And the people in that mid-range, that's great. They will maintain those systems. They will put things where they need to go, but they aren't necessarily the ones who will create those systems. So if there's a chaotic situation and a initiating follow through, a 7, 8, 9, or 10 in follow through steps into that chaotic situation, their first instinct is to try to organize it, create a system, look for patterns in that chaos. The other end of that spectrum, a 1, 2, or 3, and I guess I should be mentioning where I am in all of these. This is where I am. I am a 2 in follow through. Guess I'll go backward and mention that I am an 8 in fact finder. So I'm the detailed, intense research, become an expert, get all the information, facts and figures person there. But in follow through, so people who are a 1, 2, or 3, I guess since I talked about chaos, frankly, they're the chaos creators. The nice way of putting that here is they adapt, they develop shortcuts, they multitask. And it isn't, and this is true with all of the 4 action modes, and no matter where you fall, this isn't about what you should be doing. This is just about the way people naturally act. So for me, for example, since I'm a 2 and follow through, even if it's not a smart thing for me to jump from one task to another, that's what I naturally do. If it's really important that I not do that for a particular reason, I need to be disciplined about it and kind of force myself. Now, if I do that over the long haul, that's not such a great idea. And we'll talk about that because, as I mentioned, that happens. The real world is that, yes, we all have to deal with situations where we are not a perfect fit, and we can deal with that. It's not a problem. We just need to know that it's there. So again, developing shortcuts, multitasking, being adaptable, twos and, 1, 2, and 3 and follow through. They don't need and frankly won't finish everything they start unless they are kind of forced to. Whereas at the other end of the spectrum here and follow through, 7s, 8s, 9s, and 10s and follow through, they finish things they start, even if it's not the best idea, even if it's maybe something they should move on from because it's no longer productive at work, they will need to finish it. And you can often see them checking it off their list. We hear all the time from clients who are initiating follow-throughs, they'll have their list of things to do in their process. Something will pop up that they will need to add to their list of things to do. They will do it. They will then write it on their list just so they can check it off and have that sense of completion. That doesn't really resonate with me because I'm at the other end of the spectrum, but that's the kind of action that we're talking about with those people. Quick start. Quick start is how we deal with risk and uncertainty. It's about experimentation, trying out new things. So 7, 8, 9, or 10 that initiate action in quick start. It is about experimenting to see what will happen. If you see, and let's talk about somebody way out on the extreme, if you see a 10 in quick start, you will see them coming up with a million ideas and pursuing some of them. Maybe not a million, but they will jump into stuff. They will experiment. And when it doesn't work, and of course, if you are a 9, 10 in quick start and you're experimenting and trying things out, there are going to be failures. That's okay. When it doesn't work out, they say, great, what can I learn from it? Let's move on. Although some of that's personality, some people may take it harder. So again, thinking about the 3 parts of the mind, not everybody's going to react to that the same way. But in general, initiating quick starts, because they're so used to trying things out and experimenting, taking those risks and really innovating in that, hey, it's never been tried before, I'm going to try it out. They're used to things not working out because that is going to happen when you try new things. So even if it hits them hard, they're used to it. They typically know how to keep going, try the next thing. People at the other end of the spectrum, 1, 2, and 3 in quick start, they stabilize. They find what's been working and they stick with it. So we talked about chaos before and follow through. Somebody who's a 1, 2, or 3 in follow through might create chaos. Those initiating follow throughs, 7 through 10, they organize chaos. With the quick start here, that those 1s, 2s, and 3s will often prevent chaos, frankly, because they stabilize. They see what has been working. They are advocates for sticking with it because that is what they naturally do. Then you have the people in the mid-range, those 4, 5s, and 6s. And what do? Well, they're in between those 2 extremes. They check things out before trying them. It's not that they're resistant to trying out new things. And frankly, 1s in quick start, yes, they are resistant to trying out new stuff. That's a strength, frankly. And we need to make sure that everybody's conative traits are thought of as strengths. So yeah, we need people in every organization who will naturally stand up and say, wow, it's already working this way. Do we really need to mess that up? Maybe not. But those people in the middle, in all of the modes, but we'll talk about it here, they're kind of buffers between those extremes. So in quick start, it's being a buffer between kind of wanton risk-taking and bureaucratic or, almost head in the sand, like, no, we're not going to do anything differently. We've done it this way for 20 years. Why would we ever change it? So those people in the middle are really important because they can help smooth out those differences from people on opposite ends of the spectrum. They can get them together and talk about it. They can just bridge those differences. The 4th of these action modes is what we call implementer. Now, if I could, I would go back in time and change the name because implementer makes people think about implementation, about really more the follow-through kinds of things, maybe closure or finishing tasks. It's not about that. It's about how we handle space and tangibles. Those, as I said, tactile, tangible, 3-dimensional problem solving. So let me start on that end of the spectrum because I think that's the best way to think of it. Those initiating implementers, 7 through 10, they construct, they physically build tangible solutions. So let me give you an example actually of somebody who was an implementer in a typically non-implementer role. So this is somebody who was the chief financial officer of a large company, very large company. You know, chief financial officers are not out there physically constructing solutions. They're working on spreadsheets. They're doing presentations. Well, this was a client of ours, but I was also watching him do a presentation one time to his clients and potential investors about where the company was going to get money for their next project. He physically built a 100-story tall building. That was a, you know, small model building. Each story of those 100 represented 1% of where financing was going to come for the project. So his audience didn't necessarily need him to give the presentation that way. They're very used to watching a PowerPoint presentation, you know, on a screen behind the person with just numbers that show stuff. But for him, it was very natural to bring in that physical demonstration. Frankly, he needs to have that physical demonstration when he's doing presentations, or it's going to drive him a little bit nuts. So it was great that he did it that way. Again, it wasn't that his job required it. It's that there was that instinctive part of him driving that. So when you see those 7 through 10s, frankly, you often don't see them in an office environment because that drives them nuts. They need to be outside. They need to get their hands on things, physically doing things. If they are in an office environment where they don't have that opportunity all the time, they will get up away from their desk. They will go talk to people. They will, again, that's a little bit of personality. If they're an introverted implementer, they may not want to go talk to people, but they're still going to get up and away from their desk. They're the first people who volunteer to fix the copy machine when it breaks or do other physical tasks around the office. So if this is you and you're thinking about that, recognize it in yourself and don't fight it. Tap into it. You know, how can you use that? The other end of the spectrum in this action mode are people who really envision rather than physically demonstrate. So they see things in their mind's eye rather than having to build and construct them. They don't need to do that as much. So they picture or imagine how things work rather than physically building and constructing solutions and things. And then the people in the middle, you see the word there is restore. So again, think about it in a literal, physical way. Maybe it's the people who are 7 through 10s build furniture. The people who are 4s through 6s might restore furniture. And the 1s, 2s, and 3s, the furniture breaks. It's time to go out and buy another one or hire somebody that can fix or build a new one for them. Again, not that they can't, but it's just not their thing. So those are the 4 action modes. Couple of things just for all of you to keep in mind. Everybody has a strength in one of those 4 action modes. So we often, and even during this presentation, I might start talking about people who are only one thing. Oh, well, she's a quick start because maybe that's where she has that most dominant of those traits. She's a 10 in quick start. And you know, when we are a 10 in something and initiate action, that's really the most recognizable, easiest to see of these conative strengths. But we all have a strength in all 4. So nobody is just one thing. So really, please keep that in mind. Here's what a Kolbe result looks like. There's a lot of text that goes with it. There's actually audio that goes with it too. But the thing that most people really lock into are those 4 numbers in each of the 4 action modes. So this is just a potential what one could look like. Looks like a stair step. It's not usually like that. That's just an example. You'll notice that we show those upside down. 1 is at the top, 10 is at the bottom, kind of reverse. That's very deliberate because, as I've said, each of these is a strength. When we put it, and initially years and years ago, we put them the other way where 1 was at the bottom and 10 was at the top. And even though we told people that these are all strengths, because the top was 10 and 10 is a bigger number, everybody assumed, even if we told them otherwise, so it wasn't just an assumption, they couldn't get out of their minds that it's better to be higher. So what we're really hoping to do by showing it this way is remind everybody, look, none of them are better or worse. It's just where you are. part of me wants to take the numbers off the results because it is kind of human nature to focus on that number and think higher is better. That's not true. Well, I don't even really want you to think of it this way, but hey, maybe number 1, that's the best rather than 10. Who wants to be 10th when you can be first? But even that's wrong. The numbers help you understand where on the spectrum you are so that you can figure out kind of relative to that mid-range of, say in Fact Finder, am I the kind of person who really strongly initiates action by gathering and sharing information, or do I really strongly simplify and prevent analysis paralysis? I counteract that. So that's what the Kolbe A index result looks like. But a little bit on why does it matter? So as I said, we're a mission-driven business. Our goal, frankly, is that everybody in the world would understand first that there is this third part of the mind, because as I started out by saying, most people have never heard of conation. They don't know what it is. So we want awareness just for, there's this third part of the mind and you should try to tap into it. Then the next thing we really want to help people with is learning about your own strengths so that you can apply them to the things you care about most. So why do they matter? If you figured this out, so that thinking part, the cognitive part, when we're working in business and our careers, and frankly, in almost anything, and on teams, as we're going to talk about in a little bit, it's really important to understand, well, who has what knowledge? Some people in your organization have the knowledge and understanding and just the smarts to do some calculations or figure some things out. They've seen it a million times before, so they've learned it. They learned it in school, all kinds of ways they might have that knowledge, that understanding. But it's really important to know who those people are and who are the people who need additional training. So if there are problems in this thinking cognitive side, you can get people more training. You can give them assignments to do some of that learning. You can assign them a mentor who will show them, hey, this is what I've learned. So there are lots of ways to fix those issues, but you need to understand what they are. If you think that there's an issue that's maybe, an affect of, they just don't care. Well, no, it's not that they don't care. They don't know what they need to know to solve that problem. So teach them. That don't care, that's more the feeling, that affective part of the mind. So incentives, value alignments, as it says, they're team builders. So really the don't care, maybe that is the incentives. Well, hey, my compensation is structured so that doing a better job isn't going to get me more money. And the way this company evaluates talent, I really don't feel like I'm ever going to get recognized. So I don't care. Now, is that the person's fault? Well, maybe, because maybe they came into the organization with a terrible attitude, but maybe it's the organization's fault. So I said, maybe the incentives and the way people are evaluated really doesn't recognize people's hustle, their extra effort. It doesn't make a distinction between who's doing really well and who's not. I mean, that's an exaggeration. Almost all organizations, focus on that at least some. But I think you get the idea that you need to understand for individuals and then organizations and teams, what are those issues? So are we providing the right incentives? Are we customizing those incentives and motivations to individual people? That's why personality tests are used in businesses, frankly. It's so that we can, a couple things, communicate with each other better. Hey, I understand what your values are, so I can communicate with you. And once I understand those things about you, I can customize the way I deal with you. If I'm a leader, I can lead you in a different way so that I can pull you up, get you motivated and interested. The team builder part is most team building exercises really focus on team spirit and camaraderie. So sometimes it's giving a difficult task, putting everybody together, and then having the sense of accomplishment when we do it together and achieve. So that is why team builders is in there, because most of the time, that's where they fall. But this doing part, the conative part, why does it matter? Well, it matters because it really does drive productivity. Think about, and I guess I stopped telling you about all 4 of mine. I told you about my fact finder and follow through. With my quick start, I'm an initiating quick start. I'm a 7, so I do experiment and take risks. In my implementer, I'm a 2, so I envision rather than physically construct and build. But thinking about productivity, if you take somebody who, and again, I will use myself as an example. You take somebody who, like me, in follow through, I am by nature open-ended, adaptable. I do not drive everything to completion. If you put me in a role that is all about compliance and all about a process that I need to come up with, so it's especially difficult for me if you throw me into chaos and say, okay, organize this, come up with a plan and a system, and then stick with it all the way to the end. I can't do that. I have done that. There are times when I have to do that, but I'm not as productive. It's not as natural for me. It takes more of my energy to accomplish that task than somebody who is more naturally suited to that instinctively. So their cognitive strengths are more that plan, systematize, organize kind of person. So my productivity is lower, and that leads right to job fit. That's kind of the same thing in that context. And it's also team fit. And we'll talk about how to design teams that in general are going to work better together. The short answer to it is you need people who have as many of these different strengths as possible. If you get teams together and everybody's just the same, that is not likely to be a productive, efficient team. So a couple things as we move from kind of that is an individual. So that could be me. It's a different result, but that could be you. To looking now at not just an individual, but here's a system with 2 people basically. So we have something called the A to A report. You can look, and this is me. You actually do see my result there, David Kolbe. Amy Bruschi is the president of Kolbe Corp. I'm the CEO. So this is a little snapshot of the 2 of us. So we're very similar in quick start, but we're really, well, and implementer, but we're very different in fact finder and follow through, especially in fact finder. So this tells us, this report, and it shows us visually that we're very different from each other. You can kind of go down 2 different paths with this. This could be a problem for me and Amy. We could argue. We could spend all kinds of time fighting over process, especially let's say in fact finder. I naturally get more information. So we could be in meetings and I could just keep going on. No, Amy, justify your opinion. I need more information. Did you do your homework? Did you do your research? She could fight back the other way. David, will you stop with the details and information and what somebody else did in this realm? We just need to push forward. Why are you always looking at all these data points? What we've learned is instead of taking that path of confrontation and conflict, it's collaboration. We complement one another. So I know when it's time to move forward and stop doing research and information, I listen to Amy when she tells me, hey, I think we have enough. David, I know you could get more, but I think the company has enough information. We really need to move forward on this. It's a wake-up call for me. And I listen to her rather than fighting and pushing back. And same thing's true in the other direction. She understands that, yeah, there are times when we need more information, more detail, what data mining can we do to make better decisions? So she'll listen to me if she's, ready to go off, especially with her combination of quick start and fact finder. She's ready to go off on a new project, experiment with something. But I say, wait a second, we need to let's analyze that a little bit. Let's look at the information we already have. Let's see if there's somebody else who's already done something similar. What can we learn from that before we move forward? Let's edit some of those great ideas you have, but of those 10 ideas, maybe one's the best one, and we can use data and information to figure that out. So that's the beginning to look at kind of how this works with teams, but it really starts with you. And that's why I've spent so much time talking about just the concept of conation in general, and then looking at an individual person, because if the team that you're on is going to be successful because of you, you've got to understand and be able to tap into your own strengths, especially when you're a leader. Being in that role and thinking, okay, well, I'll make sure everybody else is going to be able to operate productively, efficiently. I'll make sure that their jobs suit them well, but you don't start with yourself. That's a problem. So kind of like on the airplane, when they say, put your oxygen mask on first, if it pops down, that's so that you as the leader have your oxygen mask on, then you can help the people around you who may not be able to do it. If you do it the other way, it's just not a great idea. So start with yourself and then start branching out. So what are some of the barriers before we get to the team part? What are some of the barriers to you using your mental energy? We'll give a little on each of these, but here are three that I want to talk about briefly. Spending energy on low priorities, letting other people steal your energy, and trying to change yourself. So the first one, and there's a little example here, spending energy on low priorities. So Mark Zuckerberg, I think he's still CEO of Facebook. He's kind of famous for, unless he has to go testify before Congress or something, he wears the same clothes almost all the time, t-shirt and hoodies, and they're gray. And he has actually talked about, he thinks it is a waste of his time to stand at his closet and have to pick out his outfit. Who cares? If he buys a whole bunch of stuff that looks just the same, he wastes zero time on that. So for him, the clothes he wears is a low priority. You need to think about those same things in your life, both personally and professionally. What are the things that are low priorities that are sapping your energy? You're spending a lot of time and mental energy thinking about and doing things that really you shouldn't be. That's not always a conative. Those priorities can be other things. But yes, you should think about, are there tasks that you're doing that don't suit you well? And that's sometimes one of the key things with letting other people steal your energy, is that they're trying to push things on you that aren't a great fit for you. It's their priorities. It's not your priority. And again, this is the real world. So I know we all have to respond to demands from other people, but that doesn't mean you should let them steal your energy or force things on you that should be a low priority, or constantly be giving you things to do that are not well suited for your conative strengths. So spot that, try to cut it out. But I want to focus a little more time on this last one, because this is maybe one of the most conative things, is trying to change yourself. And the reason we show good advice there is what we've seen over and over again. And this is one of the biggest parts of our mission, because I've had so many almost painful, not almost, I've had so many painful conversations with people who, after they got their Kolbe results, told me, wow, this is amazing. But I really wish I knew this 20 years ago, because I went through bankruptcy. I failed in my career. I got fired, and it was because I didn't understand my strengths, and I kept listening to other people tell me what to do. I mean, literally very successful people who we've worked with, some of them have just flat out said, I had gone through bankruptcy. It wasn't until I learned about my conative strengths that I think I ever really had the opportunity to be successful, because I didn't know what to tap into. So what is some of that good advice that goes bad? It's stuff like finish what you start. Yeah, that's great advice for a 9 in follow through, but it's not great advice for somebody like me. And yes, I got that advice. But as a business owner, I know, and part of, frankly, my job is understanding what are the projects that we should ditch because we've taken them far enough and they are not working. So it's time to stop. What are the things that we should keep moving on, but somebody else should do? So yes, that project needs to be completed. That doesn't mean that I'm the best person to do that. And yet if this voice is constantly telling me, I need to finish everything I start before I move on to the next thing, with my combination of 2 in follow through and 7 in quick start. So that 7 in quick start is innovating, risk taking, experimenting. That's not good advice for me. Let's see, let's give another one. Anything worth doing is worth doing well. And this isn't just a conative thing. There's a little bit of the affective part of the mind in here, the values, but no, there's some things that you're doing because they're just interesting to you, and you don't have to throw everything you have into it. It's not the key to your success. So this is a little bit of the spending energy on low priorities. So for Mark Zuckerberg, no, getting dressed, he doesn't need to do that well. He just needs to do it because he doesn't care. So it's a different priority. And again, that can be a bit of affective stuff in there too. So many times, unfortunately, the good advice comes from people who care about us the most. It comes from parents, it comes from teachers who don't understand this cognitive part of the mind. And they give us advice saying, hey, this is what worked for me, so you should do it this way too. So, it was really important for me and I'm not saying this for me in particular, but, for me, it's important to have a plan and stick with it, to use that, finish what you start. And the student or child hears that advice and it changes the way they behave, but it's not in a way that's going to be most conducive to their success over time. So part of the big trick is you need to know yourself well enough to be good at listening to the advice that you're getting and separating out the good advice for you from bad advice for you. So what we've learned, kind of, maybe I should have started with this, is because these cognitive strengths don't change over time, it is not helpful for somebody to tell you, hey, in my case, David, you don't finish what you start. That's a weakness of yours. So you really need to focus on that and fix it. Well, you're not going to all of a sudden become something you aren't from a cognitive standpoint, from that instinctive, the way you take action standpoint. The better technique is to say, hey, David, you're not the kind of person who finishes everything he starts. You adapt. You don't follow all of those systems, but you can't use that as an excuse. So if you have a report that you have to finish and give to your team, what are the techniques, the tactics you're going to use to make sure you finish that one? If you have to file your taxes on time, what are the techniques and tactics you're going to use so that you don't just kind of, whatever, I'm a 2 and follow through, I'll get to it at some point. No, that's not acceptable. So there are ways to fix those problems. I was going to look at the chat there, but Heather from the Kolbe team, if you see something I should interrupt for and jump in, you can kind of let me know. And actually that would be a good point in a second, but I want to have you guys do a little exercise. So I want to show you how we can be pulled out of our game, how we can be forced to operate in a really counterproductive and efficient way. And it's pretty simple. So for those of you who are watching at a desk or just anywhere where you can write, grab a pen or a pencil, something to write with, and a piece of paper. And I just want you to print your first and last name, but I want you to do it with your non-dominant hand. So if you are right-handed, I want you to use your left hand, and I want you to do it and make it look nice. And as you're doing it, I want you to think about, how does this feel to have to write with your non-dominant hand? Maybe do it twice. And then when you're done with that, I want you to switch and use your regular hand. So go back. If you're left-handed, you can use your left hand, and then do it again. Print your first and last name. Pay attention to the way it feels while you're doing that. For almost everybody, now there are some people who are truly ambidextrous and can do things equally well with both hands, but that is frankly a rare exception, that somebody is truly ambidextrous and there's no difference. For almost everybody, writing it with your offhand, your non-dominant hand, it felt weird. You had to focus more of your mental energy on each letter. And when you look at the results, and I'd encourage you to look at them now, it doesn't look as good. You worked harder and you got worse results. And yes, some of that is practice. You've been doing it so much with your dominant hand that now all of that practice makes you better at it. But this is actually something that it's hardwired in your brain. So again, for almost everybody, you have one hand or the other that is just more natural for you to use. If you took all the time that you spent writing and just tried to switch to your other hand, you would still be not as efficient as if you just used your dominant one in the first place. And it would take you longer. It would take you longer to master that skill. It wouldn't look as good. So you wouldn't be as productive. The results, And maybe the results would get as good if you spent all your time practicing. But why would you do that? Why would you take so much time and energy practicing something that you could have done in, I don't know, a 10th the amount of time and a 10th the amount of energy and gotten at least as good and probably better results? And yet that's what we're told to do all the time with our conative strengths. We are told, oh, you really need to be better at organization and systems. Well, do you? Again, maybe there are certain tasks that you need to buckle down and do, but no, you shouldn't focus all your time on trying to be better at that. That's not helpful. So what are your strengths? When you do the Kolbe index, so here's a little bit of homework. If you take a Kolbe index and get the result, I'm going to want you to go to pages 6 through 9 of your result and look at your do's and don'ts. What should you do? What should you avoid or not do? But even if you don't take a Kolbe index, I have another little bit of homework for you. I want you to think about what you think your conative strengths are. Again, I'd encourage you, go to kolbe.com and take your index, but you don't have to do that. You can think about, hey, how do I operate when I'm in that flow state? How am I operating most efficiently? And when I think about that, you can probably identify at least one of those 4 modes where it's, yeah, I think, an implementer, I really am the kind of person who needs to be physically touching and building and demonstrating. So given that, what's a way that you can increase your own productivity by tapping into that strength rather than trying to avoid it or work against it? And then once you do that, I also want you to discuss with your colleagues, the people you work with, and it can be personal colleagues too. It can be a spouse, it can be kids, friends. What's working and not working in terms of the way you two collaborate. So focus on the professional side. Are there areas, I mentioned with me and Amy, the president of Kolbe Corp, we've learned to make our differences a strength, but we had to learn that and we still have to work on it because there are times when we're just busy and we do our own things and we have to really stop and think and focus on how do we make it a positive. I want you to do the same thing. Think about, and maybe it's somebody that has also taken a Kolbe index, or you can get them to, you can explain what this conative part of the mind is, get them to figure out what their strengths are, and talk about how you can work and collaborate better. So I hope you'll do that afterward. I've got something here for you, a special offer for everybody doing Quantum Leap. You can get 25% off a Kolbe index. So the retail price is $55. So you can get 25% off that price if you do it through June 30th. There's also a free download on that page, kolbe.com/quantum leap. So a couple free downloads about avoiding procrastination, basically, and then also dealing with change, both, well, now moving out of the COVID era, hopefully, we're going to be changing back to different work environments. So how do you tap into your instinctive strengths to do that? So in the time we have left, and I know it's not a ton, and I know there's some questions on there that I'm going to want to get to. How are teams most productive? Well, the first and the key thing is that you really do need to value and leverage, use all people's conative strengths. So, doing that sometimes is a challenge because sometimes people aren't in the best position on that team, that their role is not the best fit for them, but you really do need to value and leverage it. So by value it, I mean truly believe if somebody's different than I am, it's not that my way of doing it is better, it's that my way is my way and it fits really well sometimes, and I should contribute that to the team. But other people on the team, those strengths are really important as well. We've done lots of research with outside academics. University of Chicago, University of Arizona are two of the biggest ones that we've done. And what we've seen in both of those and other studies with clients, teams that have a mix of conative strengths, so you have people kind of across the board in all 4 of those modes, preferably, and most teams aren't big enough or evenly distributed enough in terms of their strengths that they have all of that. But teams work best when they've got a bunch of people in that mid-range in some of the modes so that they can be a bridge between those extremes, but also people at both ends of the spectrum in each of the 4 modes. That's what works best. We call that team synergy, conative team synergy. But just having that synergy isn't quite enough. You also need to empower the people on that team to use those strengths. So that's where the valuing and leveraging those strengths comes in. Individuals at the highest or contribute at the highest levels for the greater good. So that's another part of having a productive team. So you got to empower and value those individual strengths, but then the people on that team need to actually use them. They need to not be cut out, and they need to see how their contributions will lead to overall team performance. One of the ways that you can get to these goals is by focusing on results more than method. And it says at that bullet point, force the method only when it matters. So there are definitely times I mentioned before with follow through. If I'm put in a compliance role and I am instinctively the kind of counteract, I resist organization and systems and structures. So a compliance role is not a good role for me. And on a team, if the team is tasked with making sure that we're complying with checklists and safety and stuff like that, it matters. And you can look at the research and see, yes, these steps that, this 10-step plan that is put out, it really matters. So for instance, we've looked at commercial airline pilots. They are by and large initiating follow-throughs, because to be a successful commercial airline pilot, you need to follow plans and checklists. You need to create them and then follow them through. You shouldn't be coming up with stuff and adapting and thinking, oh yeah, I don't need to follow all of these. I'm pretty confident that we've got enough fuel. I don't need to check that. Like, no, bad idea. So yes, the method matters sometimes, but what we've seen is it matters a lot less frequently than people think. So especially with teams, there's leeway to do things a different way. So don't force that all the time. Focus on the results. What's the outcome that we want? How do we empower people to get there? Give them the ability to use their own strengths. So if you are a leader of a team, I'd really encourage you to lead your teams that way. If you're a member of a team, bring that attitude to the way you interact with your teammates, and they'll appreciate it. They will see, wow, she's really letting me be myself. She's valuing the contribution that I make. I'm motivated to do more. So quickly before I finish here, I want to get to a couple of the most common issues, frankly, problems. So one of them is too much of the same energy. You've got a lot of people doing the same thing. So let's use initiating fact finder. That's analysis paralysis. You get a lot of people asking questions, driving more decision-making, more justification of every decision that gets made. More quick start. More quick start is, oh, we've got a million ideas. We're always coming up with new stuff, but we never allow any of those ideas to, actually get carried out, because as soon as we're partway through a project, oh, we have another better idea. Sometimes if it's a team, they never even get to halfway through because they're always in that idea generation phase. So again, too much of that. It's not that there's something wrong with that energy in general. It's just that there's too much of it. And frankly, this is one of the biggest problems, no matter which mode it's in, because teams that have too much energy in any of these action modes, it feels pretty good, at least to the people who have that energy. If everybody on a team and in a meeting is an initiating quick start, and they keep going over new ideas and possibilities and brainstorming all kinds of different stuff, to them, that's so natural. It seems like a great idea. It feels good. So those are other parts of mine, like that feeling good. There's actually an affective reaction to, ooh, I'm getting to do what I do naturally. Let's keep going. Yeah, but then nothing happens. The task that the team was supposed to accomplish doesn't end up happening or getting accomplished. So that's too much. Missing method, I think, is kind of obvious in the other direction. Hey, there's nobody on the team who, let's take, since we were just talking about initiating quick start, let's take the other side of that quick start. Hey, nobody on the team is raising their hand and saying, yeah, I hear all your brainstorming, but this is working really well. Why are we going to experiment and innovate with something that's making us tons of money? if we want to separate off something else to try a new initiative, that's fine. But why are we scrapping this other thing that's working? If there's nobody who brings that voice, then you're really missing out. And again, we could go through examples of that in all 4 of the action modes, but you obviously need that. And then the last one that I'm going to mention here is group conflict. So polarization. You get people at opposite ends of the spectrum in any one of the 4 modes, and they start arguing and fighting over it. We should do it this way. No, we should do it this way. And there's not common ground. This is why it's so important to have people in that mid-range in each of the 4 action modes, so that they can help. Sometimes it's almost translate or navigate between these 2 polar opposite directions that people want to go. So you need that mix. It's that whole balance. So a couple bottom line things I want to leave you with, and then we have a little bit of time to get to some questions here that you put in the chat. Number 1, understand your own strengths, whether that's taking a Kolbe index to figure it out, or it's just reflecting on your successes and when you're most efficient and productive. Try to figure out what are your strengths in each of those 4 action modes. Empower other people to do the same thing, especially when you are a leader. And that can be a leader at work, with a team, with direct reports. It can be a leader in volunteer work. It's really definitely a leader if you are a parent. So this is something that I'm particularly, I care about a lot, because again, I've had so many of those conversations where well-meaning parents pointed their kids in the wrong direction and said, this is the way you should operate. This is the way you should be successful. And kids build so much anxiety around that. Number 1, it's not good advice, so it makes it harder for them to succeed. Number 2, when they start trying things their own way, and it's not a value-driven thing, there's nothing immoral or unethical about the way they want to do it. It's just, gosh, I need to do a little more research before I take action. But, dad's telling me to just look, leap before I look, just go for it. And I'm a look before you leap person. They can actually, it's not just that it's not as productive and they won't be as successful. There's some guilt. There's some, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not measuring up. So as a parent, understand your role is not to tell your kid the one and only way that they should take action. It's to help be a guide for them so they can learn that and then apply that to the things. And that's where more of the values come in. No, that you don't want them to apply the understanding of their strengths to, illegal activities or things that are immoral. You want to help guide them to where they should apply that stuff. But I really hope you will do that. So thank you so much for your time. I'm going to open up my chat screen here so I can look back at some of the questions.
David, that was absolutely fascinating and really gave me a even greater insight into Kolbe and what it is you do. And I spoke to you at the beginning and said that I was a 7463, and I found doing a whole range of indicators hugely valuable to me as an entrepreneur and a business owner and somebody who works with other businesses. And it's been a process in a way of getting to know myself and getting to know what it is I like doing and how I like doing things. And I strongly recommend to people to take the Kolbe A index and look at the results and think about what it is you really love doing. I mean, we spoke at the beginning about Dan Sullivan, and Dan, I know, has implemented this all the way through his business. And I know everybody in his company, they only do 3 things, don't they? So They've got a whole company of people who only do the 3 things that they kind of love the most, that give them energy. And I think it's very refreshing way of thinking about business. The other thing you touched on, it made me realize why I wouldn't have had the skill set to become a pilot, and that would have probably been kept a lot more people safe. But the other thing you talked about was the family, and I think that when we understand ourselves better through sometimes doing these kind of reflective tests, it does give us an opportunity to know ourselves better and to think about how we lead ourselves and how we lead our families and how we interact at home and also within the business environment.